And welcome to part 2 of South Texas Crossfire. This is Attorney Joe Flores reminding you to join us each and every week right here on KTMV and Channel 6 Time Warner in Corpus Christi. And don't forget about Channel 21 Time Warner in San Antonio and KVTV Channel 13 in Laredo. Gabe Gonzalez out there doing a great job. He and his right hand Jacob. And we'd like to thank our sponsors and take a moment. Impact Credit Group USA, Vasquez Flores Home Health, and also the Matthews Law Firm and Rhodes Vela. With that being said, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing not only a great colleague, a good friend, but a hell of a trial lawyer, and that is Dave Matthews. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Joe. Good to see you.
I'm telling you, Dave, it's always good to see you. And for those people out there, regular folk that don't have to go through the grind of practicing law, let me just tell you, he is a national practice lawyer. Back in the day, he was with Abraham and Watkins, one of the most prestigious law firms in Houston. Now he's launched his own practice, the Matthews Law Firm. And we said that when Jason was on, Jason Webster. Don't forget, it's www.thematthewslawfirm.com. And you can always reach him at 888-222-7054?
Yes.
All right. Just making sure. Or D. Matthews at the Matthews Law Firm.
That's correct.
Now, Dave, you've tried over 100 cases, multi-million-dollar verdicts. You've done interesting cases, and you were a mentor of mine. And so it's an honor to have you on and to ask you these questions. And part 1, Jason was on. He talked about Medtronic Guidant. He talked about Vioxx, and he touched a little bit on the FDA and the role that FDA plays in researching the drugs. But do they give their own stamp of approval, or how does that process work?
Well, Joe, I think there's a big misconception about what the FDA is. The FDA is a regulatory agency that approves drugs. No drug can get on the market unless it has the stamp of approval of the FDA. A lot of people think then that the FDA actually does the testing of the drugs and they ensure that the drugs are safe and effective. And that's simply not the case. When a drug manufacturer, a Pfizer, a Merck, Schering-Plough, Bristol-Myers, some of these big companies, when they want a drug approved, they do their own testing. They have their own clinical trials controlled by their own doctors. And when the trials are done, there actually will be there'll be stories and peer-reviewed journal articles written by actually the company. And that company then asks the doctor to sign, many times, the actual article that's printed. And people think, well, this article has been printed and this drug is safe and effective because the FDA has tested it. Well, in fact, the FDA doesn't do any testing at all. It's done all by the drug companies.
Well, and you brought up an interesting fact about the doctor signing off on that, because as our viewers will recall, I brought on a doctor that was courageous, Dr. Gil Milikowski, who's on the Whistleblowers Association there and No Fear Coalition. More and more doctors are standing up and saying the FDA and the whole pharmaceutical industry are not doing right by the patient, and the whole system is flawed. And they've paid the ultimate price for that. A lot of them have been bad faith peer reviewed. A lot of them have been ostracized by their own colleagues, and many others are subject to censure. And those are the courageous people out there, so I applaud those people. But also those that are courageous, like a board-certified trial lawyer like Dave Matthews, who's standing up to a system, and many of your colleagues nationwide. You're getting thousands of these cases, and many people have this, there was that book, King of Torts, with John Grisham, and it all made it look like greedy trial lawyers, and all of it hyped up. The truth of the matter is that the FDA is grandfathering in some of these things, aren't they?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the FDA does the best they can, and I certainly applaud them. They are, though, working with an industry that is incredibly financed, very smart, and simply can overpower the FDA and let them know, listen, this is how it's going to work. And oftentimes we find that several of those FDA people get a little too cozy, in my opinion, with the drug companies. Often they not only are part of the FDA, but then will ultimately work with the drug company. So this whole belief that the FDA is this great protector of all Americans with regard to pharmaceutical drugs is simply untrue. And there's simply a movement by the drug industry to make sure that lawyers stay out of this. They don't want any part of it. And we talk about preemption, that is, that if a drug's been approved by the FDA, then a lawyer like myself can't represent an injured American and say, listen, you've been injured, but sorry, you can't have a case against this manufacturer because the FDA has approved the drug. There's a huge push in this country for this to happen, and it would be an absolute catastrophe. If a drug company knew that they did not have to have the fight from a trial lawyer like myself or others, that is, they can just get a drug approved, wink, wink, with the FDA, have it on the market, have it sold to millions of people within a very short period of time without any type of recourse or threat from a trial, they're up to speed now. They will run over people. And I think that is clearly what is going to happen if this preemption is allowed to occur.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, what's happened, as you know, I used to handle a lot of medical malpractice. I'm a nurse practitioner, and many other people handled medical malpractice, and those laws in Texas that passed in 2003 crippled a person's ability to get a day in court, particularly those that didn't work. Now, what's happening is the courts are struggling with and getting a lot of pressure in trying to say that these things can be preempted, or you can't have your day in court, and that is wrong. Your Seventh Amendment right to trial by jury, we've got to keep underlining that, and that's what this show is about, and I appreciate you coming on and letting people know about that. Let's turn to, we've talked about the FDA, it's overworked, but let's go inside the guts of how this pharmaceutical industry, how they operate, and how they get doctors to prescribe the drugs.
Well, Joe, you're talking about something that is extremely important, because when a clinical trial comes out and a drug is finally approved by the FDA, we still know this. It's only been tried on a few thousand people in clinical trials. But now suddenly it's going to be in the marketplace, and there are going to be millions of people that take that drug. And Vioxx, as an example, had the largest sales force in the world for any drug in the history of pharmaceuticals in this country. So they knew in clinical trials that it could potentially cause clots and heart attacks and potentially strokes. They knew that. And so instead of going slow and let's see what happens in the marketplace in an expanded population that's using the drugs, let's go ahead and send 3,500 plus sales reps. A lot of them are pretty young girls or typically young women that go into doctors' offices and say, "Doctor, we'd like to, you to sell this Vioxx drug." Of course, it's just on the market. And by the way, we'd like a trip to Hawaii, or we'd like to take you to New York to a show, you and your wife, or we'd like to take you to dinner tonight, and you and your colleagues can all come out to dinner tonight. This practice has been going on for so long. People don't really realize how quickly a drug like Vioxx can get into the marketplace and have an upwards of 20 million sales within just a few short years. 20 million Americans taking it, and then suddenly you realize down the road, well, you know what? According to David Graham with the FDA, approximately 185,000 people had heart attacks and strokes, and has killed over 50,000 people in a very short period of time. And they certainly knew about the problem going in. So what happens with this sales force and these marketing unbelievable machines that these drug companies have is, I think, is a catastrophe that's ongoing in this country, and it's really going unchecked.
Well, you mentioned Dr. David Graham from the FDA, correct? He
Yes.
blew the whistle on Merck, who was the manufacturer of Vioxx.
That's right.
And he had the courage to stand up and do that. And many people, I know it's understandable, are out there going skeptically, "Oh, come on, I know my doctor. He's not unethical. He wouldn't take a trip to Hawaii to push some pills." How do you respond to people saying out there, "Oh, come on, Dave, this doesn't happen every day"? Maybe they're the exception. They're the crook doctors that are doing this.
And it's a good question, and everybody wants to trust their doctor. I want to trust my doctor. But the fact of the matter is, the typical doctor that we will interview in a deposition where we'll take down sworn testimony, the typical doctor will have been hit upon by a sales rep. The last deposition I took, that doctor had been hit upon by a sales rep 350 times in the last 2 years prior to that.
And they're all pretty.
Well, they bring gifts, and
Right.
maybe it's a pen.
Pretty
Maybe it's
women
a Mont
bringing
Blanc
gifts.
pen. Maybe it's
Yeah.
something else. Maybe it's a trip, but it's always something. And I don't at face value blame a doctor for saying, "Well, thank you for lunch," or "Yeah, sure, I'll go to dinner," or "Would I like a trip to Hawaii? I'm not sure why not. Sure, that would be great." Does it influence them? Well, of course it does. Is it overt? Is it sometimes unknown to them? I think that's true, but it clearly does influence their prescribing habits, and we see that in all the drugs that we do, whether it's Seroquel, which is a drug for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. that caused immense weight gain and diabetes.